you. So if you're okay with that, we shall proceed, and then we'll have this video available to share with everyone else. We just introduced ourselves briefly, and thanks so much again for tuning in. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how we want to spend the next hour. And we know it's been a long and busy day for those of you that have been in the classroom, so we want to get right to the meat. We're going to start with a quick introduction. I'll share a little bit more about PBS Wisconsin Education and the Meet the Lab collection. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and Lisa, who are going to walk through some of the ways that they're currently using Meet the Lab with students in their middle school settings. After that, Lisa and Kevin are going to talk a little bit about Meet the Lab and connections to some of the more statewide issues that we know you're all dealing with, both connections to kind of set curriculums like Amplify, as well as connections to the Wisconsin and Next Generation Science Standards. And then finally, I'm going to share some quick start tools to help you get started. And I also have a pretty exciting opportunity to be a pilot tester and share some feedback on this collection. With an incentive, we will be sharing some pretty cool swag that we can send off to your classrooms if you're interested in that. So we're hoping that once we get through all that, we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. As we're going through, if you've not been on a Zoom webinar, if you just take a look at the bottom of your Zoom bar, you should see a Q&A bar. You can feel free to add questions there at any time. You can also put questions in the chat, and we will make sure that they get asked at the end. And when you're putting questions in chat or making comments in chat, just a note that it does default to only send your comment to the hosts and panelists. If that's what you want, that's totally fine. But if you want to comment to everyone or let folks know who you are, make sure that you mark that to everyone so folks can see it. All right. So if you're not familiar with us, again, thanks so much for being here. PBS Wisconsin Education is here to create free, standards-aligned, Wisconsin-focused educational media for grades pre-K through grade 12. And that includes videos, games, interactive content, educator guides, a whole range of great content. And we believe that learning is really powered by curiosity in Wisconsin classrooms, libraries, virtual environments, and neighborhoods. And we support that through practical professional learning events like this one. And we do have some really great networked peer communities I'll share a little bit more about at the end. We are here tonight, though, to shine a spotlight on one of the newest science education resources that we've created and to introduce you to some of the amazing educators who helped us make it. So Meet the Lab is one of our newer collections. It is a series of educational media resources designed to introduce middle school students to scientific research really through a human lens. And this collection is funded by the Timothy William Trout Education Fund, the PBS Wisconsin Focus Fund for Education, and Friends of PBS Wisconsin. I mention that simply because I want to emphasize that all of our resources are completely free to use and to download to use offline, because our donors really believe that education is a good investment, and that is a wonderful place to operate from. So we're happy to share all of this with you freely and encourage you to share it with others. The collection includes an introduction to 5 different labs at UW-Madison, and they are working on really everything from antibiotic discovery through soil science to cancer research aided by really unique imaging technologies. And the learning goals for exploring each lab focus on 3 main areas, and let's call them kind of the why, the who, and the how of scientific research. So as you explore each of these labs, you're going to find tools that are going to help your students understand some of the real-world problems that scientific research is trying to change, and hopefully be able to see themselves in the role of scientist, as well as getting a chance to flex their own curiosity and research muscles as they do interactive science practices right alongside some of these researchers. I want to introduce you to just a short clip from one of the pieces in the Nervous System Engineers Superpowered by Stem Cells lab. I think this is going to give you a really nice introduction to what we mean by introducing science through a human lens. In the beginning of this video, we're going to meet Miranda Ramirez Vang. She is a young woman who was affected by a spinal cord injury at a very young age, which prevented her from being able to walk. And we're actually going to watch about 3 minutes of this story. So it's not the full video, but I just want you to meet Miranda and learn a little bit more about her story and see how her life has been really directly impacted by the research happening at the Ashton Lab, that we'll talk about at UW-Madison. And then I'm going to walk you through some of the other resources that are there for students to explore. So with that, I want to make sure that I have my sound on. And I'm going to play this clip for you.
Science is just so much more than just a subject or a concept. We owe everything to science. And if something is wrong, you can dive deep and figure out why it's wrong, and then you can fix it. My name is Miranda, and I'm a student at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee studying biomedical sciences. I was born and raised here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was a very talkative child. And I was very family oriented, you know, even back then. I loved playing with my cousins, and I have a big family, so I was always active and playing. But my parents found something odd. I was very delayed in developing, and they wondered why. So they took me to the doctor very regularly to do tests and see what was wrong. Finally, I had an MRI when I was 5 years old, and they found a tumor in my spinal cord. And it was intertwined with my nerves, and in order to remove that tumor, there was going to be some nerve damage. And so that resulted in spinal cord injury. I lost most sensation in my right leg, some sensation in my left leg, and that led to me, you know, losing my ability to walk.
Yeah, why are you here, honey? Do you remember?
Yes, I'm looking for my back to feel better.
And so I think that that's what the doctors were kind of preparing us for, saying, hey, you know, spinal cord injury often results in paralysis. It was likely that I was just going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, but my parents and I were like, nope. My parents and I refused to accept that, and so, you know, we pushed. That's the thing about my family. We are hard workers. I was a very curious child, and so I always like to do a lot of reading, and, you know, my dad is also very into reading and learning what's going on in the world, and he was the one who told me that, you know, stem cells are a thing. Have you heard about stem cells? And he basically said it's like a clean slate for cells, and they can grow into whatever they want. I also learned that, you know, the reason that I wasn't going to get any better was because my nerve cells were damaged. That doesn't regenerate. And so when I put those two together, I said, oh, that's a key player in, you know, something that could fix this. I was a kid when I learned that, and so I didn't know what to do with that information. All I knew was that there was hope, you know, and I knew that people knew about this and that people were doing something about it.
All right, so that is hopefully gives you an idea of just how powerful this collection is. Sorry about that, didn't mean to replay that. And I wanted to share this lab in particular. We're going to be talking a lot about the virus investigators lab tonight, but I wanted to give you a flavor of the collection. There really is a lot of diverse science happening, and so it's really kind of all across the board. And Miranda's story is one of my favorites. I wanted to share this one with you as an example. I'm going to take you over to the student-facing lab page just to kind of show you what this looks like if you wanted to share this with your students. So we just watched a clip that is part of what's called the Why Research Matters video. So on each lab's page, you're going to see this introduction to, you know, kind of the why of this topic, an introduction to the video itself. This is where that Miranda video lives. There's a couple of discussion questions and prompts that your students can respond to right here on the page. And then below this, we have then an introduction to the researchers in the lab. And these are the folks that are working on trying to solve the problems that the people featured in these videos are facing. And you can see in the front, there's just a quick introduction to who these people are. If you flip the cards over, you're going to see these kind of interesting facts about them. Randy Ashton, who is the principal investigator for this lab, really loves cleaning. Carlos, I thought his fun thing was his middle school story was he used to play basketball every day. So this makes these scientists relatable. It makes them human. And you can just kind of explore those and see who these people are. If you like this activity, we do have an interactive that your students can use where they fill out their name, a little bit about themselves, their secret superpower, the weirdest thing they love, etc. So that's kind of a fun way to engage. Going on down the page, we then introduce the work of the lab. And I am also going to show you a brief clip here just to give you a sense of what this looks like. This video right now is a single video that would play all the way through. We're right now working on making this more interactive so that students would actually see a list of questions they could choose from. So if they wanted to, they can kind of pick and choose and hop around. And in our newer labs, you're going to see that that's how these videos are structured. But let me just show you a little bit about the Ashton lab here.
What is your lab and what do you research there?
So my lab, we work at the interface between engineering and biology. And that simply means that we're trying to engineer the human body, particularly the brain and spinal cord. And if we can create models of the brain and spinal cord here in our lab, then we can use those models to study how those organs develop and to study how they go wrong when you have some type of disease or defect in those particular tissues. So engineers in general take raw materials such as oil or trees and we turn them into usable products such as gasoline or paper. And so for my lab, we're trying to create human tissues. And so we start with human stem cells.
What is a stem cell?
All right. I'm sure many of you would love to know what are stem cells, but we're going to stop it there. Just again, give you a taste of what the content is. So after you get this exploration of what the lab is, you again have some discussion questions. And then there's this science practices activity. Just to give you a little sneak peek, I'm going to actually hop over to the virus investigators lab. We're in the process of making these all extremely interactive, but just to show you, we're kind of in the middle here of explaining to students different tools that are available to look at things. And you can see that there's these kind of neat ways to show them to think about scale. So we're looking at a bird through binoculars. Here's what we might see. If we had a magnifying glass, here's what we might see. Well, and if we had a microscope, here's what we might see. And so there's lots of great interactives built into those. I'm not going to spend too much time sharing those right now because you're going to hear a lot more about that when you hear from our educators. Last thing I want to show you is just that on each of these labs, we do have educator resources, and I'll actually just show you how to find it on the site. You're just going to come right up to the top here where it says educator resources. And we have kind of an introduction to the collection, a quick start chart I'll share more about later. But then for each of these labs, you're going to have a really simple educator guide that you can reference. So you can see what content areas the lab connects to. You can see where it may connect to your curriculum. You can see what standards are supported. And then you get kind of an overview of what those resources are and some teaching tips for all the activities I've just walked through. I want to pause here because I've been doing a lot of talking and I want to hear from you in a little bit. And just to kind of cue that up, I want to talk about, kind of one of the unique features of this collection. So the amazing faces that you see on this screen are just a few of the scientists and researchers that are featured in the Meet the Lab collection. We partnered with the Morgridge Institute for Research and the Discovery Outreach team at the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. They're both part of the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. And they were the ones that connected us to all these labs. And one of the key values that PBS Wisconsin tries to bring to all of its educational media is representation. And, when children think about what they want to be when they grow up, often their dreams are inspired by who they look up to. And if students see people like them reflected in course materials about what it means to be a scientist, they're just going to be more likely to identify with and be able to imagine themselves as belonging in the field. So in addition to the representation you'll find in our Meet the Lab collection, I did want to give a shout out to Kevin Anderson from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. He has been working very hard on connecting with and curating a list of working professionals in STEM fields right here in Wisconsin that are representing all kinds of different diverse identities. And there are also lesson ideas that you can integrate those people into your teaching as well. At the end, I'm going to share some additional resources that are available at the national level from PBS Learning Media here too. But just to kind of think about representation, and as we transition to talking to our educators, I want to invite you to share with us what are some of the barriers that you face. This is a value I imagine many of us share, but it's not always easy to bring this into the classroom. So we've got this set up through Poll Everywhere. What you can do if you would like to respond is, number one, if you have trouble with this, you can certainly just put it into the chat. But if you want to have your fancy responses show up here on the interactive screen, go to pollev.com. It's going to ask you for a username, and what you want to put in is PBS Wisconsin 486. You can also use text. So if you have your phone in front of you, you can just pick it up and you're going to start a new text that goes to 37607, and the content of the text would be PBS Wisconsin 486. So I'm going to give you just a minute to log in and respond. Michael just put the link to Poll Everywhere right in the chat. So if you want to hop over there, I'll let you take a minute to let us know what are some of those barriers that you're facing. It looks like we've got some responses coming in. Legacy materials are not reflective of present day. Yep, absolutely. Having easy access to examples. Definitely. Where do I find these scientists? Great question. I've used Skype as scientists, but those aren't local. Hopefully, whoever put that in, that's a good resource that we just shared from Kevin. Prep time involved, not even sure where to look for connections to scientists in Wisconsin. It's a challenge to find them. Textbooks don't highlight Wisconsin people, right? Exactly. Dealing with outdated materials, and it all takes time. These are great. Thank you for sharing these. We hope that the Meet the Lab collection is kind of one piece of the puzzle to help you at least bring that representation on the screen to your students, but I am going to transition it over to Kathy now to share a little bit more about kind of what this means in her classroom. So Kathy, I'll let you take it away from here.
Great, thank you so much. So in talking about diverse populations and getting representative scientists, you can see there a picture of some of my boys. I do just teach boys, and I'm in a 100% Latino community, which means that it's really hard for me to find a scientist that looks like my boys and that they can look up to, because usually the pictures they see of scientists, they're old white guys with bad hair, and my boys are not. They're not old, they're not white, and they don't have bad hair, most of them. So they want to see what does a real scientist look like. And when my kids walk into my room, they are scientists and engineers. They are not students. They are not. They are active, and I want them to make those connections with people out in the real world, so that they can share the explorations that they're doing with people out, again, adults in the field. You can go. Thank you. So this is my classroom, and it always looks just like that, where they're all sitting nicely and raising their hand. Actually, that's totally a staged picture, because they never look like that. But one of my students said to me, I don't understand. I see people and they're protesting, and I understand that what they mean when they say Black Lives Matter, but what do they mean by science is real? And so it prompted this really cool conversation about what is science? How do we know what is real? With so much information coming at us all the time, how do we know what's true and what's not? And so starting to talk about, literacy, how do we make our students understand the importance of analyzing and looking at, something on, well, I guess they don't use Facebook, but, Twitter or that other stuff that they do, how do we know that it's what's real? And so looking at virus investigators in particular really was a beautiful connection for me. So in addition to being part of the cohort group that helped to develop it, the materials were so relevant, they were so timely, and they were so important for my kids to start to understand what it really means if you have a virus in your body. So my guys love microscopes. They love microscopes. They use microscopes for everything. I mean, their ears, their eyeballs, I mean, in addition to the things that I'm trying to teach them. But certainly our microscopes, and I love my microscopes, but they're rather limited, and they're not going to be able to get my boys to be able to see a virus. So as you saw a little bit before that interactive slide, they look through a binocular, they look through a microscope, they look through a light microscope, like you have in your classroom, and they can see different things, and that's nice. But then all of a sudden they're able to use an electron microscope and actually go in to the cell, which is never going to happen in my classroom. But my guys, when they looked and they said, oh, that's the coronavirus, that's what it looks like. Oh, I bet they called it a coronavirus because it looks like it's wearing a crown, and corona means crown in Spanish. So they made this huge connection, which was really cool. And they would never have gotten that by looking at a light microscope, right? So they had this opportunity to use an electron microscope and actually see inside the cell, which was really neat. So virus investigators, I used it in a couple of different ways, and it can really be used in almost any way. So the biggest, the phenomenon they're looking at, the question they're trying to figure out is, how does scientists stop a virus that makes us sick? So the way virus investigators move and the way Meet the Lab works, you could do this completely virtually. You could do it hybrid, or I'm in person, so we did it in person. It's truly a phenomenon-based problem, because let's face it, we've got numbers that are rising and falling and rising and falling. And we've got, well, you should be vaccinated. My school keeps shutting down on Fridays to have vaccination clinics. Well, what does that even mean? Why do I need to get vaccinated? And so how much more timely can this really get? But viruses are never going to go away. And there's probably going to be another pandemic at some point. So understanding this, not just because of corona, but because of viruses in general, is really, really crucial. So I did this a couple of different ways. I did it as a whole class where I showed it on my smart TV, and then the students came up to the screen and manipulated the microscopes and other interactive aspects of Meet the Lab. And it worked pretty well. That was with my fifth graders, and my fifth graders needed a little bit more support, so that worked well for them. The sixth graders were able to do this on their own with just some assistance from me occasionally if they got stuck. But really, it works so well that you could do this as a subplan. I mean, put it in your subplan folder and then use it yourself when you have time. But it just fits in just beautifully. And if you say, well, I'm not teaching about viruses, I'm doing something else, you don't have to use virus investigators. There are other Meet the Labs that you could choose from. But they're so good and they're so well organized that you're not going to want to give them to a sub, because you're going to want to be there when the kids do it and go, oh, that's so cool. So this is just when you start talking about assessment, formative assessment, certainly it was the kids talking back to me. They're having discussion questions. In the virus investigators, you watch a video of a man who is an EMT, and to talk about what it was, he's talking about the very beginning of the pandemic, and to have the kids talk about and discuss what his experiences were, and then what their experiences were as the pandemic came to fruition. There are these summative ways that you can also assess your students. So this is a printed off copy But in the newer Meet the Labs, they type in online and it creates a PDF that I then had my kids share with me so that I could grade it in Google Classroom. But you can also print them off if you wanted to. So really almost any way that you can think of, Meet the Lab has tried to anticipate those needs. Anecdotally, my kids loved Meet the Lab. So the next day after we did it, we had some downtime and I had kids going, can I go back to Meet the Lab? That was cool. So they liked it. And they just went back. They weren't getting graded on it. They just went back and were having fun with the microscopes. They truly enjoyed it. And they said things like, oh, so that's why we care about viruses, because they're wrecking the cell. And then they said, and I told my family we should get vaccines, because after this investigation, it certainly brought up, well, what are we doing then? Now we understand what the virus does in the cell. What are the researchers doing? What are they looking at to try to prevent the viruses from wrecking the cell? And I just really want to say it's just so easy to implement. And this quick start chart is crucial. So it tells you, if you're like, well, you know, I'm teaching the human body. Oh, let's see. Well, let's go. I can look it up. And here's one that's all about the nervous system. Oh, it hits these NGSS. Oh, it's amazing. It's all right there for you as you're trying to plan your unit or your lessons. So take a look at these. They are so good. And they're just so well done that I just love them. I love them. And I've not just used Virus Investigators. I've used a couple of the other ones. So they are all really good and really, again, timely, relevant. They get kids talking about phenomenon and figuring it out for themselves. So love this project. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer any of them about implementation. And I will turn it over or turn it back.
Yeah, we're going to go to Lisa from here.
So I just echo everything that Kathy said about Meet the Lab. This has been a fantastic experience. So when I was using it, the Virus Investigators, it was the Meet the Lab that we were working to create. So when I was using the Meet the Lab materials, it was the already created Meet the Lab materials that you can find on PBS Wisconsin website. Equally wonderful, standards aligned, all that good stuff. But this is my classroom, or was my classroom. I taught 8th grade Earth and Space Science to about 150 students that year. We went through all kinds of stages. We were in person, we were all virtual, we were hybrid, half in person, half on the computer. And I also taught E-Academy, who are strictly online students. Merrill Middle School is a Title I school, so a very diverse population, and it was really difficult to find actual scientists, much less Wisconsin scientists, who looked like my students or had backgrounds similar to my students. So a big thing that Oshkosh is really pushing, and I'm really proud of our district, is equity for all students. And Meet the Lab definitely is equitable for all students. I mean, not only just in diversity with connections to those local scientists, but the average reading level of my 8th graders is about 5th grade. So exploring different science materials became difficult and time consuming to adjust it so that they could understand what they were reading. Meet the Lab, like Kathy said, her 5th graders were reading it with some help. But all my 8th graders were able to understand everything. And if not, we would pause, and dig words apart and things like that. There's tons of resources built into the materials too to help teachers differentiate as needed. So it's really like it's all right there for you to use. I can't speak highly and more highly than Meet the Lab. It's a wonderful science resource, not because I was part of making it. So I'm curious to know if you guys are using a set curriculum in your classroom, or if you have complete freedom like Kathy, because I'm super jealous of Kathy, who has freedom to teach as she pleases. I fall in the A category. So again, this is a poll of the same thing we just did. So if you texted it in, you can text it again. Yes, if you're using 100% no. Wow.
That's only one response so far,
Oh,
so
okay.
we'll wait for more to roll.
I won't get too jealous yet. So as you guys are voting, I was tied to Amplify. So it was a difficult phenomenon. It's a phenomenon-based curriculum. It's also very scripted. So it was really hard to figure out when I could fit Meet the Lab in, because I definitely knew it was a resource I wanted my students to experience, but you also don't want to take away from the Amplify material either. So it looks like a lot of us were set with a curriculum that we needed to teach. So that's exactly the position I was in. So I was using the district mandated curriculum, and I know just because it was Amplify last year, I know how often that changes. So Meet the Lab is so flexible. Like Kathy showed you, it had on the website, you can see exactly like where you could fit in some of those Meet the Labs. So that's helpful. Before and after units, whether it's curricular or not, it's still standards based. I had a lot of students who would come in. We had a flex learning time built into our schedule. So I had a lot of students who would want to come in and just do Meet the Lab. Like, can we go through this other Meet the Lab, or can we use the microscopes, things like that. That was super exciting. So the standards based is very helpful. You can pick whatever standard you need some more activities to align to, and you can pick whatever Meet the Lab meets those standards, and it's all set up for you, which I think is a good segue to Kevin, who's going to talk a little bit more about the standards based. State Vision, over to you.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And I appreciate those notes on the constraints that are sometimes there with curricular materials that teachers have. You know, anytime districts purchase those curricular materials, they're not going to be able to connect to the local community or Wisconsin-based stuff because they're nationally created materials. There'll always be a limitation of them. So I love when we have good, solid supplemental resources like Meet the Lab to support what's going to be there in the package materials. It's a really nice feature there. The key part, so Lisa was talking about connections to our standards. Throughout the standards, if you dig into them, there's a phrase that comes up over and over and over again, which is that students use their content knowledge, the scientific and engineering practices and ways of thinking about the world to make sense of the world around them and to solve problems. And there are three parts of our standards: the content, the practice, the ways of thinking. But the thing that makes it a standard for Wisconsin is when those three things are used together, when students use those things together to make sense of the world around them. And so I certainly appreciate that that's an emphasis of Meet the Lab, that it's students having that opportunity to do some sense making themselves and to think about problems in the world around them. So we go to that next part there, Jen. Yeah, so the other part that I really appreciate about Meet the Lab that we emphasize in our state vision for science is identity. And I'm constantly asking myself, how can we support students in them being seen as the scientist and them feeling like they're the engineer, building up that self-efficacy that they can do it themselves too. And the middle school years are really a crucial time for that, for them to feel like they are capable and competent as scientific or engineering minded people. And part of them building up that identity as well is that they're able to see scientists and engineers that look like them. As was shown earlier, that they're not just the older white people, but that they're a range of people all around the world. And I had a work group that didn't just highlight Wisconsin scientists. Actually, we've got a whole other page on the DPI website highlighting scientists from around the world. Because some students have the misinterpretation, I guess you might say, that science is something that happens in the United States and that other countries aren't necessarily doing science where maybe their families were originally from. So another thing that we highlight there is that scientists that look like them from all around the world and where their backgrounds are digging into meaningful problems too. And finally, just the whole idea of relevant phenomena. I like that Kathy and Lisa talked about like the virus investigators, there's stem cells, there's things that are going to connect to students, to their lives, to people that they know such as people that have had cancer. And the relevant phenomena is really what's going to engage kids. So I appreciate that that's another emphasis here of, local standards connections and relevant phenomena. With that, I'll turn it back to, was it turning back to Lisa or returning back to you, Jen?
Turn back to me. Thanks so much, Kevin. And thanks so much, Kathy and Lisa. It's really wonderful to see this resource come alive in Wisconsin classrooms. And that is really so exciting. What I'm talking about is we want to have more of that happening around the state. So we want those of you that are tuned in today, either live with us or watching the recording, if this sounds like it can fit somewhere into your classroom, we would love to work with you. As Kathy mentioned earlier, the quick start chart is a really good place to just sort of assess what's there, see where there might be gaps that you're trying to fill that some of these resources might help you with. So I would really encourage you to check that out. We are going to share these slides after the presentation with everyone who's registered, so you'll have all of these links accessible. The next two things I want to talk about a little bit more in detail are we're looking for pilot testers and we're looking for feedback on how this collection lands with students. So I'm going to give you some more details on that in a second. And then we do have more resources beyond what we make here in Wisconsin that are connected to all kinds of different science topics. So I'm going to walk you through some of those. But thinking about finding more pilot testers, we have a really cool partnership with Foldscopes. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Foldscopes, but they are pretty fantastic little foldable paper microscopes that you can see some pretty amazing things looking through these things. It does take a little doing to get them built, as Lisa and Kathy will attest to. But once you get them built, and yes, Kevin, once you get it working with your phone, it is absolutely amazing. I mean, just because we have a second, I'm going to show you like the first 2 seconds of this Foldscope video, just to give you a sense. That's all you need. Like, oh my gosh, they are very, very neat. If you are willing to try out Meet the Lab in a Wisconsin middle school classroom, we have a form that Michael's going to pop into the chat in a minute, and we'll send in the follow-up email too. We would love to send you as many of these as will equip your students, whether that is a set of 10 or a set of 100. And in exchange, what we'll do is we'll follow up with you and we'll ask you for some feedback. If you really like the way this is working, or if you're open to having some really excited public media people hanging out with you, we also have an option for a classroom observation, because as we make this media, really part of our philosophy at PBS Wisconsin Education is that we want to make things with educators in the room at every stage of the process. So some of you may have used some PBS resources in your classroom, and they may be things from, things that you see over the air. I mean, we all enjoy the great programming that we can watch on PBS and over the airwaves. What's different about our PBS Wisconsin Education resources is that they are really purpose-built to meet learning goals in the classroom. And the way that we do that better is by having educators in the room when we're making them, having educators there to pilot test them, give us feedback on them, and think about how we can grow these resources moving forward. So if you are a gamer, we would love for you to try it out. Let us know what you think. And if you would let us come and hang out with you and watch this happening with your students, that would be fantastic as well. So there is a lot more to explore. PBS Wisconsin Education creates free standards-aligned Wisconsin-focused educational media, as I mentioned earlier, primarily for grades 3 through 8. And we have lots of different resources. I've only highlighted a few on this slide. They have cross-curricular connections between English language arts and social studies, music, environmental education. So even though I think we have primarily science educators tuned in, I just want to encourage you to check these things out and share them with your colleagues. The Wisconsin First Nations site in particular is an absolute treasure trove of resources. And we do have this value of working to include representation of diverse identities across all of our collections. And we're trying to do that not only in the faces that you see on the screen, but in the people that are making these resources as well. So again, those of you that are familiar with us or get a window into a webinar like this, if you can think of someone that we should connect with, we want to know about that. We're trying to get these out and serve the students of our state. One of the things I want to share a little bit more about, since this is a science-focused webinar, is our Climate Wisconsin collection. This is one of the older collections that we have. It was made, gosh, I want to say maybe like 10 years ago now. I would have to go back and look, but it is still a very, very relevant resource. This includes 10 videos that are focused on different impacts of climate change across Wisconsin. And those things are really supported by research that was conducted by the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, or WICI. And if you go to the site, students can explore the effects of climate change on the 2 major lakes in Madison with the Ice Cover Interactive, or they can look at these stories, and each of the stories has a background essay and teaching tips. We'll just hop over to the site really quick and I'll show you the Ice Cover feature. So there's a little essay here, and you can see if we want to explore Mendota or Monona. Let's take a look at Monona. And we can see what were the 10 longest seasons of ice cover, the 10 shortest seasons, and then we can examine what that trend looks like. So this is, again, one of our collections that's been around for a long time. We may be updating this at some point in the future, but I think a lot of what's here, coming from an environmental education background, and specifically with the Aldo Leopold Foundation, I have a particular love for the phenology story with wonderful Nina Leopold Bradley, but these are just really fantastic. I would encourage you to explore these resources. And then in addition to the local offerings that we have here in Wisconsin, those are really complemented by a huge, vast universe of nationally curated resources that exist on PBS Learning Media. These are standards aligned videos, interactives, lesson plans, and they are really for all grades and all subject areas. You can get to this website from our PBS Wisconsin Education website, or you can go directly to the URL on the screen, wisconsin.pbslearningmedia.org. I am actually going to show you one of the specific collections that is related here, and I'm going to hop over. I'll just show you how to find it from our site. You're going to go right down to PBS Learning Media. And I'm going to start with NOVA because I think that is one that we think of most often as having just really amazing content that is absolutely fascinating. So you can search by keyword and you're going to easily find NOVA here. You can see that in the NOVA collection, there is a lot to explore. I'll just highlight that they do have a People in STEM collection here, so you can see some more diverse faces in science. You can also browse PBS Learning Media by subject area. So let's say you came in here and you're just kind of thinking, I'm looking for something supplemental. I want my students to be able to watch something related to the lesson I'm teaching, maybe give them a little spark to get them interested. I want something in life science. You can come over here and see, everything from bioethics to cells and cell processes. You can filter these then by grade level. So this is down to middle school, and you've got different types of things on PBS Learning Media. There are a lot of videos that came back on this search result, but there are also interactives, kind of like what we showed you in the Meet the Lab collection. So these are all interactive lessons, and it's really a wide universe. You can also just think about kind of at the top level, looking at, okay, I'm a middle school teacher and I need something on science. It's, there's lots of different ways to search here. It's almost like I've been in other roles in my career where it's, you're trying to teach people how to use a website. What I love about learning media is that whatever way you're used to searching, if you just want to search by keyword, if you want to explore the hierarchy, it's pretty easy to find things. Also, if you create a free teacher account, it has some pretty nice features. So I'm actually going to go to Meet the Lab, does exist on our website, but you can also find this collection within PBS Learning Media. And one of the nice things about Learning Media is that it's got some really great integrations that are built right in. So let's say we wanted to look at virus investigators And we are thinking about sharing the Why Research Matters video with our students. This is integrated with Google Classroom really slick. So I can just say right here that I want to share this with Google Classroom. I can also use their lesson builder tool. So if I want to use something from Virus Investigators, something from Nova, and something else, I can kind of put those all together with questions and prompts that I come up with in the middle. Oh, and Lisa says it works with Canvas too. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So it's just really a pretty great site. I also use this to keep track of links. So being in public media, I get all kinds of emails about new things coming out all the time. And I can favorite things to hang on to, just remembering what came out so that I can find it again and explore it later. And I can organize these in all sorts of different ways. So learning media is a great resource. And I would definitely encourage you to do some more exploring over there when you get a chance. We do want to save some time for questions. And so my last thing I want to share with all of you is that we hope this isn't the last time that we see you. We would love for you to be connected to us. If you may already be on our mailing list, that might have been how you learned about this webinar, but if you heard it on Kevin's science newsletter, or if you saw it somewhere else and this is kind of your first interaction with us, you can follow us on Twitter. We do have a bi-weekly newsletter that shares all kinds of great resources. We have a private Facebook group for people that are using digital media in the classroom and want to exchange ideas with one another. And we would really just love to see you in all of these spaces. So with that, I will see if there are questions from folks, and you can feel free to pop those in the chat if you have them. I don't see any in the Q&A bar. If anyone has a question, please let us know. And while we're waiting for those to come in, Lisa, Kathy, Kevin, any closing words that you would like to share?
I totally forgot to talk about the integration with Canvas. So that's the LMS that Oshkosh District uses. So it was really easy to embed all these materials right into Canvas. So my students who are in my classroom were still getting the same thing that my students who are at home online were getting. So the material is super easy to use. I'm sure you could integrate it with almost any LMS as an embedded video or embedded docs. So it makes it so easy to use as a teacher.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that, Lisa. All right, well, seeing no other questions in here, I just want to thank all of you so much for being with us this evening. My contact information is on the last slide here, and I will make sure to share this deck with everyone. If you want to reach out and you want to connect to Kathy, Lisa, or Kevin to ask more questions, share ideas, brainstorm about this or anything else science education related, I know that these are some of the most amazing humans I have interacted with, and they'd be happy to connect with you. So I can be the connector if you want to do that. And we're always here and happy to answer questions as well. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here this evening. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, I do see a question. Any plans for adding materials for younger grades? We do not have any plans to add specific materials for younger grades right now, Catherine, but I would be curious to hear from you kind of what gaps you're seeing, and there may be materials I could recommend for you from learning media. In Wisconsin, we've kind of focused in on the grade 3 through 8 because that's where there are some gaps in the national collection, so we're trying to fill those and make them relevant for our state. But if you have some specific things you're looking for, I'd be glad to connect with you and I could maybe help you find those things. Oh, great. Thanks. Lisa just passed me a question that came into her. If districts are not allowing visitors in, can PBS meet virtually with pilot rooms? Yes, we would absolutely love to. We understand that the world is a crazy place right now. So we would love to be inside of a room if we can, but if we are inside of a room on a laptop screen, that is better than not being in the room at all. So yes, please let us know if you'd like to do that. Oh yeah, Kevin, thanks for mentioning Sid the Science Kid. If you're talking about kind of really early grades, that is a really fun collection. Super, super interactive. All right. Any other questions from folks? Well, thank you so much. You all are absolute champions. We know that educators are facing a very challenging year, so we really appreciate your time this evening, and we look forward to supporting you however we can in the future. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.